Hey, 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 welcome everybody. I'm so happy that you took some time out of your busy lives to join me for this webinar called Science Interactive Notebooks, Everything You've Wanted to Know About Effectively Using INBs in the Science Classroom. I've got some great strategies to share with you that will make an immediate impact on your classroom. My name is Chris Kesler from Kesler Science, and I'm a former middle school science teacher, and I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science here in Texas. I'm now the CEO of Kesler Science, which is dedicated to helping teachers just like you maximize their efforts and get the most out of their students. One cool thing about Kesler Science is that everyone leading this company is either a former teacher or still currently in the classroom. We have all personally used these methods in our own classes and know how effective they are. That's probably why Kesler Science is one of the largest stores on Teachers Pay Teachers, and over tens of thousands of science teachers use our lessons in their own classrooms. I want to give you a quick win right out of the gate here. Imagine a place you could go to learn and ask questions to over 20,000 other science teachers. I created an amazing science teacher network, and it lives right on Facebook. You can search it up by going to Kesler Science or just searching for Kesler Science Professional Learning Network. It's a vital resource for many and one of the few places on the internet that remains positive. We treasure this resource, and I'd love for you to join us over there. I really encourage you to stay until the end, not only because I'm going to bring the heat with my interactive notebook knowledge, but I'm also going to give you a bunch of free templates, including both physical and digital options. I'll give you more details about where to download these at the end of our time together. You're definitely in the right place if you meet any of these criteria. You're new to interactive notebooking in science and you want to see what all the fuss is about. Maybe you've used interactive notebooks before, but are looking for some new strategies and ideas to make the experience even better for your students and yourself. Maybe you're trying to decide whether or not you should use physical or digital notebooks. Or maybe you're just super detailed and like everything laid out for you, and you just need to be told the best practices and the way it should look in your classroom. I'm going to give you that also. Quickly, these are the topics that I'm going to cover today. First, why we should be using interactive notebooks in science. We're also going to hit what they are, what they aren't. Next, we're going to learn about all the procedures and processes of how I use interactive notebooks in my own classroom. I'm going to be giving you ideas from other teachers as well. We're going to then talk about the differences between physical and digital notebooks. We're also going to walk through many of the processes and procedures that I used with interactive notebooks in my class. I'm going to show you how to model your own teacher interactive notebook for students and what to do with those absent students. We'll get into grading the notebooks, and we'll even briefly get into creating your own templates and some best practices there. So why use interactive notebooks? One thing I should say right off the bat is that INB stands for Interactive Notebook, if you haven't figured that out. Some teachers also call them ISNs, or Interactive Science Notebooks, and I'll use those terms throughout the webinar interchangeably. I think it's important to understand why we should be using INBs in the first place. I feel like if you're able to buy into some of these reasons, then your whole INB experience with your students will be so much better. The research is in on these things. And I'm going to quote here. This is Marzano, Pinkering, and Pollock have contended, as of others, that to foster higher order thinking, instructional activities must call on learners to restructure their prior knowledge and link it to new information. I'm continuing the quote here. A crucial aspect of this brain-based activity is that students use their own voices and perspectives as they construct personal meaning for various mathematical processes, data, and events, end quote. Graphic organizers allow students to be creative while still allowing the teacher to maintain some control of what information is important. For example, I taught a unit on the properties of minerals. And when I think of the word luster, I think of kind of like a gold bar shining in the sun. But my 140 students may have a completely different image in their head about what luster means to them. The graphic organizer allows them to be creative and draw an image that helps them make a personal connection to the idea of luster. As you probably know, organization can be a nightmare for many middle school students. Using a graphic organizer and having them kept in a central location teaches that organization. It also compartmentalizes information and makes it easier to learn for the students. This is a skill that shouldn't be overlooked. It's vital to the learning process. And more is not always better. During my first year of teaching, I used to believe that it was my job to make sure the students had every last word I said in their notes. That was not only detrimental to the engagement level in my class, but it was also tuning many students out. Students need to learn to condense information into critical ideas. Graphic organizers and interactive notebooks are a means to that end. Using an interactive notebook is a lot more fun for students. Taking notes shouldn't be a drag, and with interactive notebooks, it isn't. I'm not one that believes we need to put on a dog and pony show at every turn, but if students are enjoying the activity, it sure makes it a lot easier on our end. One question I get a lot is how often do you use the interactive notebook and what do you even put in them? Here's some things I use my interactive notebooks for. Reference documents. You may have a periodic table or a formula chart or even like a standard conversion charts or even an index of vocabulary words. This is great for the interactive notebook. When students need to organize new information, the IMB is perfect for that. You can use templates, graphic organizers, or even just subdivide up a piece of paper within the notebook to just reorganize that information. What about reflections on previous knowledge or newly learned information? This piece is often missed when using interactive notebooks, and I personally believe that it is critical as the interactive notebook templates themselves. It's just as critical as those. Allow space for reflection on open pages or even between templates. And then you have group activities or data collection. Many times during the lesson, you may want to stop and say, get with your partner to discuss XYZ. Students need a place to communicate that information, and the IMB is a perfect place for that. Many people confuse the word interactive to mean that the student has to flip something and all of a sudden it's better. It certainly can mean interacting with a manipulative, but the interactive piece is also the back and forth between the student and the journal. It's meant as a dynamic place of reference, data, and reflections. A good interactive notebook will give and take with the student. So what an interactive notebook isn't. IMBs aren't just some glorified art project that takes up too much time. If the student interactive notebooks are nothing more than a notebook loaded up with templates where you dictate every piece of information that goes into it, then I think the basic premise is being lost. The templates are simply one aspect of the interactive notebook. And this one is a personal preference, but I didn't like including items like lab sheets or old tests inside the interactive notebook. They take up too much space. I like to have a separate 3-ring binder for those pieces of paper and those types of handouts that get passed back to students because they turned it in or something. That's a perfect place for those rather than folded in half and shoved into their IMB. It's going to be a disaster for you. Let's talk about the differences between physical and digital notebooks. You're going to have to decide which one to use, and there are pros and cons to each. The pros of using physical notebooks are that the students have these physical interactions that they can gain a boost of memory retention and engagement for those students who best learn through touch. I personally believe that physical notebooks are better for retention and reference too. This is a big one for me. You can use them without the need of technology or internet access. I don't know about you, but our Wi-Fi at school was sometimes at best, right? There's nothing worse than planning a lesson around Wi-Fi and then not having access to it. Physical notebooks allow for artistic expression as students can draw, color, glue materials directly into the notebook. They aren't limited by the creative tools available with whatever online program you're using. So just try drawing a cell model with Microsoft Word. It can be done, but it's just not the same. Students often cherish their notebook. It gives them something tangible that they created. This also helps with accountability. One of the cons is they can be bulky and are going to require you to store them somewhere. I'll talk about letting kids take them home later, but for now, this issue of storage will need to be addressed. They can also be lost or damaged. You're dealing with middle schoolers here. This can and almost certainly will happen at some point. Physical interactive notebooks aren't easily shared with others outside the classroom, whereas digital notebooks can be shared easily. The other issue is they can also sometimes take more time to get set up than a digital notebook, although there's a learning, curve with that as well. If you don't have access to a copy machine or have a very strict limit, then physical notebooks might be something to reconsider. The reality is that they do take resources to maintain and do them correctly. Now let's look at the pros and cons of a digital notebook. The first big pro for them is they can be accessed from anywhere with an internet connection. There are no issues with portability either. This fosters collaboration and allows students to work on them from home without fear of, it getting lost. Another cool thing about digital notebooks is that you or the students can use links, videos, or other digital resources to enrich their learning. This may be something that really matters to you. Digital notebooks are also easy for you to edit quickly and send them out to your students. Of course, you also save a lot of time because students don't have to cut out the templates either. There's no need for paper, which saves time and other physical resources. And then lastly, digital notebooks are easier to share with teachers, parents, and classmates. They're great for collaboration with other students in the classroom also. Let's switch over to the cons. You're gonna need an internet connection and a device for every student if you want to use digital notebooks effectively. There's also the fact that digital notebooks have a learning curve for students. The reality is you're going to be dealing with questions like, I don't know my password, or I didn't save mine to the correct folder, I can't find where my files are, etc. That is a reality. The biggest con for me, though, is that it removes the hands-on engagement that physical notebooks have. There's just something to be said about a project or a notebook that's tangible. As I've talked about with, as I've talked with many teachers over the last several years, I hear them say over and over, they are moving back to physical notebooks for this particular reason alone. And then lastly, there's this distraction of the student being online. Are kids actually focused on the task in front of them? Or are they being kids and they messing around with something else on a different browser tab? So you're probably going to ask me, like, Chris, what would you use? And for me, personally, I would still prefer to use the physical notebooks. They may not work for everyone, depending on your circumstances. But if I was going to go back in the classroom tomorrow, I'm using a physical notebook. Both forms of interactive notebooks offer unique benefits and challenges, and the choice between them might depend on your specific needs, resources, and objectives of your own class. Some educators even choose to blend both types to capitalize on the benefits of each. At the beginning of the year, I required my students to have the following items. Composition notebook. There are two main types of notebooks. There's a wide-ruled one or a college-ruled one. And some students prefer college-ruled, and that's fine. But wide-ruled makes it easier to read for both you and the students. I don't think this is something to get hung up on, though. Like if they bring one, fantastic. In August every year, places like the big box stores like Walmart and Target and office supply stores often have these notebooks on sale for like 50 cents. I'd go there with a $20 bill and just load up on these suckers. You're going to use them. Students aren't going to have them. And just give it. That should not be a hang up for you. Just give them one. It's not a big deal. When you let it become a source of stress, that it's just completely unnecessary. Give them one, move on to the next thing. I also require a bottle of white glue. It doesn't matter the size at this point. I'm going to tell you a little trick, though, that I learned from a Dinah Zeik seminar that I once attended. And she said that if you give students the smallest, teeniest bottle of glue possible, they make these little wee bottles of glue, that students will actually use less because they fear running out. I thought that was a brilliant idea. And once everyone brings in the glue, then you can pass out the smallest bottles for IMB projects and then use the bigger bottles to have a student, refill the small bottles from when it's necessary. I'm personally not recommending glue sticks for a couple reasons. Yes, they are less messy, but they run out quick. Kids don't know how to use them effectively, and they're significantly more expensive than white glue. I personally don't think they stick as well as white glue either. I recently reached out into the Facebook group I mentioned earlier and asked for some of their best IMB tips. And one of the teachers mentioned she doesn't even use glue, but rather tape. I've never tried this, but it sure sounded like something that I would be open to at least look into and see if that would work. My school provided us with a box of those small kid scissors, but you're going to need a lot more pairs than you think throughout the year. If I were doing it again this year, I would require a pair of, just quality scissors to be on the school supply list and then take them up and distribute them when necessary. Some students are going to buy a really nice pair and keep them in their backpacks, and that's fine. No problems with that. Just make sure your school allows them to be running around with scissors in their backpack. And then lastly, I required a 3-ring binder for students to keep with them. This will be used for lab sheets, handouts, tests, etc. that I was talking about earlier. Anything that doesn't fit nicely into an IMB will go in there. These will stay with the student throughout the year and could be used for other classes as well. For digital notebooks, you're all obviously going to be needing some type of computer or tablet and a Wi-Fi connection for every student. It just is kind of self-explanatory. I'm not even sure why I made this slide. Let's now talk about setting up the IMB at the beginning of the year. There are a couple of components to this process: the outside of the notebook and the inside of the notebook. And I want students to personalize the outside of the notebook as much as possible. In fact, I would even allow them some time in class to make this happen. The point of allowing them to get creative on the front and back of their IMBs is because it's the first step to getting them to make a connection with this notebook. Encourage them to bring in photos or draw pictures, use stickers. You could even print out some cute covers with graphics for them to color and make them their own. Whatever you decide, just make sure it becomes something that represents that student. Now, you're going to have 120 to 150 notebooks that look similar to each other when looking at them from the spine. If you're a super type A and you have a label maker, then maybe you could make labels for each student with their name and period. If that's not your style, maybe you could just use some of that colored duct tape and use a different color for each class period. Students can use a Sharpie to write their names on the spine of the notebook, and this is going to make it so much easier when a student is trying to hunt for his or her notebook at the beginning of class. Now let's move into the inside of the notebook. During the setup process is where you can lay the foundations for quality notebooking. This is just as much an exercise on how you're going to be doing things all year long as it is on getting the student notebook set up for that first lesson. You have to decide a couple of things before this initial lesson, though. First, are you going to use a table of contents? Now, I personally didn't like keeping a table of contents for a couple of reasons. The main reason is I didn't want to battle students all year long with keeping their journals up to date with the table of contents. Some of you may love that structure. That just wasn't for me. Another reason is that students aren't always going to be on the same page because they have different size handwriting or longer reflections than others. And for me, I'd rather not have a table of contents than have one and have it fail 5 weeks into school because students didn't do a good job of keeping up with it. I just think it sends a bad message if every time a student opens their IMB, they say this junky table of contents that doesn't align with what they were doing. So if you decide to use one, I would suggest numbering the pages as you go. Another teacher from the Facebook group suggested that you keep a visible copy of the table of contents somewhere that's easily seen from anywhere in the room. I thought this was a cool idea. How long should it take to cut a template out? Each template is going to be totally different. Some of them may only take a minute, while others actually may take 4 or 5 minutes because they're a little more complex. This can become a huge pain point if you don't plan ahead. Set a visual timer and stick with it. I used to use an online timer, and students knew that when it hit 0, I was moving forward. This takes a little training, but you're going to be so glad you did this. You also need to answer, what resources are my must-includes? In Texas, our middle schoolers use a periodic table and a formula chart throughout the year. So I made sure that was right inside the front cover, and the formula chart was the first page in the IMB. Some other resources you may include are maybe the lab safety contract, maybe a table of contents, measurement chart, although most of the interactive notebooks or composition notebooks have a measurement chart on the inside back cover typically. What about a glossary or vocabulary? That'd be a really cool idea. I saw one of the teachers I taught with once, she created her own glossary and include it as the last 6 pages of our interactive notebook. Super cool idea. And then lastly, you have to decide, are you going to separate your different units within the interactive notebook? I personally did not do this, but I know some teachers that did. You can see the pattern here, right? So a couple of ideas I've heard is where teachers would create their own little tabs or buy little tabs, those little Avery tabs, and put them in and have them tape in. So you'd have a life science and an earth science tab or whatever. Another thing I've seen is that you have students grab all of the pages from a particular section. So you grab all like the life science pages and then use a marker or a highlighter to color the edges of the paper. Both these ideas are easy to implement and very inexpensive. I took 2 days at the beginning of school to set up my INB notebooks. You probably don't want to do this the first 2 days of class, but you need to allow your students to have enough time to gather the supplies and get them to you. But maybe that first couple of weeks, certainly this is a great time to be setting up your notebook for the first time. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago that this exercise is about setting up your notebook, but it's also a lesson on procedures and high quality work. I want to share with you a little lesson I learned from one of my former assistant principals at the last middle school I was at. So I thought this was just a fascinating anecdote you can tell your kids. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the story as I would tell my own students. You're going to be like the students in my classroom, and I'll be the teacher, right? So I want you guys to take a minute and talk with your AB partner about what the characteristics of quality work looks like. And I would allow kids to talk. I'd put a minute timer up, and I'd allow kids to talk, and we kind of share. Well, okay, what did you come up with? Allow people to have those responses and share it with the class. And then I would say, now I want you to take another minute and talk with a different partner about what the characteristics of poor quality work look like. And I would give them another minute, and we'd share those on the board, have them come up to the front of the class, have one partner come up to the front, and everyone just has a dry erase marker and writes on the board, and so you have it all to view. And then I would go back and I'd be like, class, this may sound weird, but I relate high quality work to cupcakes. You see, I love cupcakes. There's something just so perfect about them. Not only do they look amazing, but in order to have a perfect cupcake, a lot of things have to be just right. They have to have just the right amount of ingredients to make them, moist and delicious. Everything in a cupcake is well thought out and aids in making the overall cupcake a delight to eat. And when I receive work that's well thought out or created with high quality characteristics in mind, and point to the ones we talked about here, I call that work cupcake work. And I can tell almost immediately that it's going to be awesome and it has all the attributes that you've listed right here in the classroom. Now, on the other hand, again, I'm still talking to the class. On the other hand, I sometimes receive work that looks like it had little to no effort. And nothing was involved in this work, right? I call this type of work a smashed cupcake. You ever seen a smashed cupcake? It looks like it came from the bottom of the box, or it's all smashed up. Maybe even someone licked the icing off it and put it back in there. Everyone can relate to that. These types of characteristics, or cupcakes, have the characteristics of poor work. Smashed cupcakes are gross. No one wants to eat them. And so I want you to look at the characteristics that we came up with as a class of what poor quality work looks like. When you hear me say smashed cupcake throughout the year, this is what I'm talking about right here. And then lastly, every once in a while, I'll get a student who will turn in a cookie instead of a cupcake. And then I'll ask them, any ideas what kind of characteristics a cookie has? What do you all think? And I'd have them talk about it for another minute or so. And they're going to get to the answer, right? And I'd say, don't get me wrong. I definitely love cookies, but I'm asking for cupcakes. Make sure that when you're turning in work that it addresses the content and the guidelines you were given. I totally support creativity and going that extra mile, but the end result needs to cover the guidelines or the rubric that you were given. Anything beyond that is icing on the cake. And so that's the story I'll share right up front. And I'll use those cupcakes and smashed cupcake words. Change it to your own. Change the story to something that you love and make it your own story. The kids absolutely love it. And they know immediately what you're talking about when they turn in, junky work. Let's move on to the storage of all these supplies. If you don't have a process in place for how to handle the distribution or the storage of your interactive notebooks, then you are setting yourself up for failure. In my classroom, I made the students keep their journals in class unless they had a test the next day. I got sick and tired of students losing their journals and not bringing them to class. And I know some of you are thinking, but how are you going to be able to study during the week? I don't know what kind of students you have in class, but mine weren't studying content all throughout the week, maybe before a test. I suppose it's not fair to say that about everyone, but the students who were going to lose their journals or not bring them to class were also the same ones that weren't studying at home. If a student asked to take it home, fine, that's fine. Sometimes a parent would request they bring it home, no problem at all. I've tried it both ways, and keeping them in class was far superior for me. I was fortunate enough to have large cabinets where each class had their own shelf to store their journals. But I've also seen journals stored spine side up in those large milk crates. Looking back, I actually wish I would have done those milk crates, because the cabinets became a source of stress when a bunch of students are entering the classroom. They're all trying to get their journal at once. It just became a place that always had some kind of issue, right? The journals are much more likely to get scattered around, and when they're in stacks, and these milk crates are just going to be better organized. I really would definitely do that going back into the classroom. If you have lab tables, I would suggest hiring somebody, and I quote hiring somebody at the beginning of the year to be the supply manager at each table or group. This student's going to be responsible for grabbing the journals and the supplies for that group of the day. When students are picking this person, have one of the criteria be that student is usually early to class. This will allow them to gather the supplies and have everything everyone be seated right at the bell. If you want to take this strategy to the next level, you need to check out how this teacher used the desk towers. I'm just going to back up here. This teacher used desk towers to store all of her journals. You could do so much with these. Each period could have their own space for journals. You could have an extra drawer for supplies like glue, scissors, etc. Again, I did not personally set my class up this way, but I wish I would have seen this while I was still in the classroom. Each one of these towers costs like $20 or $30, but it may be a good investment. And maybe you could do a donors choose project for them, or maybe your admin that'd be something they'd spring for. This would be This would be a great use of someone else's money. It never hurts to ask, right? I would also suggest using the same spot in your classroom all year long to communicate which supplies the students need for that day. You could even have a sign that's green on one side if the journals are needed and red on the other if you don't need them. At the end of the class, the supply manager collects all the journals, puts them back in the crate. You don't have kids running all over the classroom. It just becomes a lot easier. With the glue and the scissors, what I did is I put them on the tables at the beginning of the day and left them there throughout the day. I was willing to trade off the potential distraction for the time it takes to pass them out and pick them up each class period. Now, your mileage may vary on this one, and picking them up when they're not in use may be a better fit for you. You're going to also have to build in a directive to say, close the glue bottles into your lesson. Like, you're going to have to say that every single time. These are middle schoolers. They're not going to do it unless you say it. And even then, they may not do it. Processes are the key. Choose something that works for you and stick to it. You could also have those school boxes, with supplies in it for each table. I use those for markers and map pencils. I just said map pencils. Okay, but no one probably knows what unless you're in Texas, you don't know what a map pencil is. But that's what we used to call the colored pencils. Like when I was a kid, we called them map pencils. I don't know why, but that's what they were. I guess that they were used to draw maps at one point or something. I don't know. So anyway, map pencils are Texas speak for colored pencils. And I suppose you could put everything in one box. I'm just thinking out loud here, but maybe you could have a couple of students clean out the prep boxes once a week. This may include, throwing away the little trash pieces that get in there, or sharpening the colored pencils and refilling the glue. I promise you're going to have some students who would love to do this job for you. The digital notebooks need a home as well. And you're going to have to decide where those are going to live. Are they going to be in a separate file or embedded with other files in your current lesson? That's a decision that you need to be making up front before students get there, right? Again, the key to this whole process is consistency. Develop a plan that works for you and do it every single day. Students are going to love the structure, and you're going to love the time saved. Let's move on to the teacher notebook. It is my suggestion that you keep a teacher notebook for each prep you have. For example, you may want to have one notebook for your on-level classes and then another notebook for your honors classes. The reason for this is simple. Students thrive when they know what good work looks like. They want to know how they're going to be measured. By having a teacher notebook, it sets the benchmark for what your expectations are. You should also be asking students at the end of the year to keep the notebooks that are there, the best notebooks that you've seen from your students throughout the year. When you show students at the beginning of the year that, hey, this is what so-and-so did last year, and this is what you're going to do over the next 9 months, they're going to get excited about that because the notebooks are cool. When they're done, they look really cool. Challenge them to be the notebook that you keep at the end of this particular year. Many students are going to rise to that expectation. Even if you're building the notebook along with your first period class, you're doing notes and you're actually building it along with them, I think that's okay too. Some of the templates need some explanation. If you can hold up an example, it makes it so much easier for the students to understand what they should be doing. Another benefit of having a notebook is that you can bring your notebook to parent meetings. Now, trust me when I say it's super powerful when you go into a parent meeting and you can show a parent that this is what we've been doing in class and this is the work that your child has produced. So I have my teacher notebook and this is what your child's looks like. I actually had a teacher do that with my parents when I was in middle school. So she made me get out my green Trapper Keeper I've got the hand-drawn, Van Halen logo on it. This is back in the mid-'80s. And, the folder was just an epic disaster. Nothing was in the rings. It would just scatter paper all over the place. And guess what? The ownership was totally on me. There was no arguing about who was at fault. Like, this is it. This is what it looks like. Keep a teacher notebook. You're going to be happy you did. I would suggest taking pictures of it as well. I had one student one year that thought it was going to be cute to throw it in the garbage. Luckily, I found it, but this kind of stuff happens. Now let's chat about absent students and the interactive notebook for a second. I get this question all the time, and I have some great solutions for you. If you have my interactive notebook templates from Kesler Science, you know that I include pages that have all the notes pre-written on the templates. This can help with developing your lesson, but they can also be used for absent students. I'm not sure there's much benefit to having an absent student copy my notes word for word. I simply give them the missing pre-filled templates and allow them to use my teacher notebook to build theirs out. I found it helpful to, have a dozen copies of the notes on hand for absent students. And if you want to make this even easier on you, have some of your early finishers cut out a few of the extras for templates for you for the rest of the day. There's always going to be a few kids that in each class that can, cut out templates super fast and, more faster than anyone else in your class. Give them an extra one. Say, hey, will you please cut a second one out for me? And then you have those on hand for the rest of the day when you need them, or for absent students. Now, if you don't have pre-written templates out, well, then clearly you're shopping the wrong TPT store. But kidding aside, one thing that I used to do was photocopy my IMB pages at the end of each day and give those to students as well that needed them. Another question I get all the time is how to grade the interactive notebook. And this is one of those things that really is dependent on your grading policy, or your campus's grading policy, or your district grading policy. I'm going to talk about how I handled it, and that may not work for everyone. I'm also going to give you some suggestions on how you can handle it. What I would try to avoid is assigning a grade to every page of the journal. You're going to be buried beneath a mountain of 135 journals. This is not meant to be a source of stress for you. It's going to lead to burnout. It's going to lead to resentment towards your job. There's just better approaches to this thing. Let's talk about that. What I did was I assigned a major grade once every 6 weeks based on just looking over the journals as the students are working on something else. One idea that you could do is have the class develop a rubric together for their INB grades. Set it up on a scale of 1 to 4 and then write the characteristics for each level. It's probably best to describe the perfect journal and then the absolute worst journal, and then fill in the gaps from there. Have them all agree to it and use the rubric as you're walking around the class while they're working on some other task or a lab day. Another quick way to get grades are to give a periodic open note quiz. Those students who are taking good notes will be thankful for the opportunity to use their interactive notebook. And you can have conversations with the students that may not have good notes right at that time as well. Never pass up a chance for that teachable moment. Want to take it to the next level? Of course you do. How about having the students trade and grade all the journals using the rubric that they came up with? Any contentions that came about could be settled by you, and all of a sudden you have a more meaningful grade and an expectation set for the students for the next time you do this type of grade. Now, I understand that some districts and schools don't allow the trade and grade. I didn't have that issue when I was in the classroom, so we were able to do this, and it was highly effective. One teacher I spoke with actually sent her IMBs home and had the parents provide feedback on the notebook that followed the rubric. I'm not sure what kind of buy-in you could get with this, but anything that engages parents and guardians is a win to me. Maybe just make it an extra credit. Hey, if you go show your parent this and share what we're doing in class and have them sign it, I'll give you 5 extra points on the test. It's an easy win, right? Every once in a while, you're going to wish you had a template that you can't seem to find. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on talking about this topic, but you can actually create your own as well. I'm going to give you a huge piece of advice here, though. Do not try to do this in Microsoft Word. Word processing programs are not intended for these kinds of designs. You're going to end up wanting to scream because it's not going to do what you want. Believe me, I've spent dozens and dozens of hours doing this, and this is not what you want to do. Instead, I would suggest using PowerPoint to create your templates. You have all the tools that Word has, but the layers are so much easier to work with when you're in PowerPoint. Now, you're definitely going to want to stick around for the freebies, but I first want to thank you for signing up for this webinar. I know that you didn't have to be here, and I appreciate what you're doing for all students across the country. This is, they're going to be better because of your efforts. I hope you found value in the strategies I presented this evening. I'd also like to share some resources that can save you a boatload of time when creating interactive notebooks. I know that teaching science can be a challenging career, and it's the reason I started Kesler Science, because of my own struggles in the classroom. My number one goal is to make your job easier. I've created a complete bundle of science interactive notebook templates, which will put you on the fast track when it comes to notebooking in your classroom. The IMB bundle is packed full of hundreds of templates from all areas of science, and it's on sale for a bundle price of $50. If you were to buy all the units out individually, it would cost you $100. It's literally 50% off the bundle pricing is, and it's $50. This thing is amazing and will really fast track what you're doing. The complete bundle is broken down into units that cover space, chemistry, earth science, structure of life, which is like kind of intro to cells, microbiology, weather, force and motion, ecosystems, environment, energy. So all of these are within the bundle, but they can also be purchased by unit as well. If you like only need weather, you could go out and do that as well. Again, INB webinar to get that. And in the INB bundle, you're going to get hundreds of templates for middle school science topics. Each topic is aligned to middle school Texas TEKS, which are our standards here. That said, there's also thousands of customers across the country that use them in their classroom, including all the NGSS states as well. The entire bundle contains pre-filled out templates like you've seen in the photos, like actually right here. It contains blank templates. This is going to make your job so much easier for absent or modified students. You should also know that the INB bundle contains both digital files as well as printable files as well. So if you're going to do a physical or a digital notebook, they're both included in this product. It's really, really a cool resource. It's at one point it was the top selling product on TPT. It's still in the top selling all-time products on Teachers Pay Teachers, and literally tens of thousands of teachers have used this in their own classroom. I feel like this is a no-brainer purchase for any science teacher. Now for the free stuff. Let me show you where to get that. So I'm giving away a free sampler of the IMB templates. It is a sampler, but it contains quite a bit of stuff and quite a few free templates in there. You can go to KeslerFreebie.com. Just make sure you type in one S there for Kesler. KeslerFreebie.com will take you out to my TPT store where you can download a sampler of all the interactive, a bunch of the interactive notebooks. And there's going to be digital versions and physical versions in there as well. Thank you for spending your time with me today. And this is just kind of a little thank you that, hopefully we're giving you a couple of wins by giving you a bunch of tips and showing you about the Kesler Science Professional Learning Network on Facebook. We've given you some free templates to get started. And then also, if you already know that like this is the direction you're headed, get out there and just buy the bundle for the Science Interactive Notebook bundle. It's amazing. Again, you can do that at inbwebinar.com and get the free ones at KeslerFreebie.com. Thank you again so much. I appreciate all that you do for students and trying to be better at your craft. I just can't thank you enough. Take care.